I'd like to talk about the need for greater collaboration to promote interoperability in data sharing. And I'd like to talk about what the Data Sharing Working Group is doing to promote that collaboration. So let me start with my journey that took me towards the Data Sharing Working Group. I have a background in telecoms and regulation, and my journey in the world of data sharing started in 2017, when I was doing research for the report Data for the Public Good, when I was working at the National Infrastructure Commission. It was at this time that DAFNI was being set up, and it was clear to me that DAFNI could help to support the work of the National Infrastructure Commission. At the end of 2017, Data for the Public Good was published, and it set out the many barriers to sharing data and explained that because of the many benefits of sharing data, there was a need for a framework to enable the sharing of data. It set out a vision for a national digital twin, a vision which was taken forward by the National Digital Twin Programme at the Centre for Digital Built Britain as an ecosystem of connected digital twins, where ultimately data is shared safely and securely across sectors. And one of the recommendations from Data for the Public Good was to set up a pilot project to show the benefits of sharing data across infrastructure sectors. So I worked with colleagues at the National Digital Twin Programme to set up Credo, the climate resilience demonstrator. It shares data across energy, water, and telecoms networks to increase resilience across the infrastructure system. The Credo Digital Twin uses data from Anglian Water, from UK Power Networks and BT to understand interdependencies across the networks and to identify how future extreme weather events, such as extreme heat or flooding, would impact the networks and cause a cascade of failure across the networks, so that you can identify which are the most critical assets that you need to invest in ahead of time. Credo was set up in 2021 by the Centre for Digital Built Britain as a demonstrator project, and it's really fantastic to see it being taken forward by Connected Places Catapult and UK Power Networks as a decision optimizer with innovation funding from Ofgem, so that this will be a tool that can be used by networks in the future. So I wanted to show you, if it comes through to the next slide, I wanted to show you a snapshot of the organisations involved in Credo back in the early years of Credo, where we had a number of asset owners, universities, software developers, and of course, DAFNI. DAFNI has played a very important role in Credo throughout, providing the secure hosting for Credo data throughout the development phases. And this secure hosting and the security access controls, which have limited who can access the data, have helped to build trust across the parties involved in Credo and to help Credo grow. And of course, there are many more organisations now involved in Credo than what's shown up here, as it continues to be led by Connected Places Catapult. But I wanted to show you here that from the very beginning, it was necessary to bring a number of organisations to work together. And of course, that can take time to get the contracts and the legal agreements in place, but it was an important thing to do, because no one organisation could deliver Credo alone. And after the first phase of Credo, I spent time presenting Credo at different conferences alongside other data sharing initiatives, which had also emerged over the same period of time. And here, I'm showing you a snapshot of data sharing initiatives at the time, in no way representative of all the data sharing initiatives at that particular time. But what I noticed when we were talking about these data sharing initiatives was that we weren't using enough common language between us to describe what we were working on. We weren't yet focused on interoperability between the initiatives. because innovation projects are usually funded to deliver something narrow and specific within a set time period rather than to join up with other initiatives. So it could be a little confusing to understand who was making progress in what area of data sharing. Who was working on a data license that could be used as a template, or who was working on an ontology that could be used by others. It wasn't clear where best practice lay. So what I think we found over the last few years is that whilst it's been brilliant to see many different data sharing initiatives spring up, let a thousand flowers bloom kind of style, we have a growing coordination problem. Because each data sharing initiative is funded to solve its own use case and not to connect up with others. But we find there are overlapping use cases using the same data but for different purposes. And we're inventing different ways to share that data across different projects. So our use cases are connected because we're tackling problems around climate change and resilience, but it's becoming harder to achieve interoperability because we're developing multiple platforms for sharing that data. So I set up the Data Sharing Working Group in 2022 to help tackle this problem. We're a voluntary and unfunded group, and the purpose of the Data Sharing Working Group is to bring people together to discuss and develop data sharing best practice in a collaborative way that builds upon existing work and avoids duplication. We recognise there are many barriers to sharing data and to interoperability, and we're working to overcome them by sharing what we do. Our motto is do it once and share it many times. We're composed of over 100 members across government, industry and academia, and we normally meet on a weekly basis, and our focus is on sharing best practice and working together to agree how to describe things. So we've been working on how to describe data sharing infrastructure. And I'd like to open this question up to you all and ask you, what is data sharing infrastructure? What does that term mean to you?
I'll go for the Dharma textbook answer of people, processes and tools.
Yes, people, processes and tools. And any other suggestions?
Yeah, maybe it's a big pot that you can put a lot of data in and take a lot of data out, and hopefully you don't burn your hands.
Okay, right, big pot.
To me, it's mostly about the people. So you already mentioned the people in your comment, and it's about connecting the people who know where stuff is and how to get it out in and out. And I think that is often undervalued. So I would put the people first. Thank you.
Any other suggestions this side of the room?
So for me, it's actually about the physical infrastructure that data sits on. So the servers, the software, and making them connect better to each other.
Thank you. And Catherine?
I think the physical is important, but I think the benefits, rewards structure for action and the culture is really important to make a successful infrastructure.
Thank you. So actually the people who have spoke are members of the Data Sharing Working Group, and funnily enough, this isn't a plant. I didn't previously let people know that I wanted to ask this question, but it shows you that everyone has slightly different perspectives here, and we have different views on what we want data sharing infrastructure to be. But we know that terms matter. And we know that definitions matter because the term data sharing infrastructure is being used more widely now. It's used by Ofgem. It's used in the industrial strategy. So it does matter that we come to an agreed definition of what we mean by data sharing infrastructure. So it's really interesting to hear those different ideas and suggestions today. And I'm sure there are many more across the group, and people may be thinking, what do I think data sharing infrastructure is? So, I mean, this is what we do in the group, is we have these discussions. So We have been making progress on what we think data sharing infrastructure is. So my definition is I would say that data sharing infrastructure includes all the technical and non-technical components which enable a safe, secure, and seamless sharing of data across organizations and sectors. And in the group, in the last year or so, we've been delving deeper into this definition and into what we mean by this. And we've come up with 6 components of data sharing infrastructure, which align with the 6 technical and non-technical building blocks of the data spaces program set out by the European Data Spaces program. And we see in the data sharing working group, we see the term data sharing infrastructure as akin to the term data spaces, which is how it's talked about in Europe. So when you are setting out on a data sharing initiative, working around the wheel or the donut or whatever you want to call it here, you'll need a business case. So you will need to be able to set out a business case which sets out the use case for sharing the data and the purpose for sharing the data. So you know, what are you sharing the data for? You will need to have governance in place, organizational governance and rules for sharing the data. You will need to have regard to legal and regulatory requirements, understanding relevant legislation. And you will likely need to have a data license in place to enable you to share the data. You will need to think about data interoperability so that the data can be exchanged between parties and make sense to those using it. And you will need to think about security and trust, making sure that the appropriate access controls are in place to ensure trust is built and maintained across participants. And you will need to think about how the data is used and the value that is derived from sharing that data. And we found in the group that these are the key components of data sharing infrastructure, but that we really lack coordination across the governance, the legal, the data interoperability, and the security and trust components, and that we can do much more to share approaches and develop best practice in these areas. I want to emphasize that the framework that's set out on the previous slide aligns with the European Data Spaces program, where they set out the 6 technical and non-technical building blocks, as these blocks match up to our components. And there's also been a report, the Dutch report, which is referenced here, which has been recently published about sustainable revenue models for data sharing initiatives, and it draws some interesting conclusions. One of the points that it makes is about the difficulty in connecting existing initiatives. And here, the IDSA, the International Data Spaces Association, says in a blog about the report that it says that this suggests that countries have more data space activity than they realize. The challenge isn't starting from zero, it's identifying and connecting existing efforts. So this trend of multiple data sharing initiatives not connected to each other isn't unique to the UK, it's happening across many other countries. So it's important for us to understand what's going on in different data sharing initiatives, even if we're not directly involved in them, because we need to understand what works well and what doesn't, and avoid reinventing any wheels. So on the right-hand side here, it's just sort of an image to show you what the data sharing infrastructure snapshot report looks like. This was published last year, and in it we provide a snapshot of different initiatives and set out what they are doing under these 6 components of data sharing infrastructure. Under the area of business case, of governance, legal, data interoperability, etc. And whilst we have this table which explains what a limited number of data sharing initiatives are doing, it would be fantastic to be able to expand that table, to make it live, online, and to capture progress as it happens, so that we can see who is making progress in what space. Because it's really important to build on existing work and to be able to identify which part of data sharing infrastructure you are building and to communicate that well so that others can learn from it and look to interoperate with it. Whether you're working in research or industry, as increasingly data sharing solutions need to be shared across both the public and the private sector, the research and the commercial sectors, to tackle our common problems. So solutions which are developed for private sector data sharing need to be shared with public sector data sharing, and vice versa. And the Dutch report offers some important lessons, particularly around collaboration. It refers to the Dutch polder model, where competitors sit round the table to discuss solutions to common problems. It says, consensus building approach runs deep in Dutch business culture. Advanced initiatives focus heavily on cross-domain interoperability. They understand that a data space, data sharing infrastructure, becomes more valuable when it connects to other data spaces or sources. And if we can connect up our data sharing initiatives across different sectors and domains, for example, if we can connect national energy system operators' energy data sharing infrastructure with Stream's water data sharing infrastructure and the many other sector data sharing infrastructures, then we can create a connected data sharing infrastructure. But we know we need to coordinate more across governance, legal, data interoperability, security, and trust. And we need to coordinate more across both public and private and research sectors in addressing those areas. A data sharing infrastructure needs to be able to serve all types of demand for data sharing, whether that comes from research, the public sector, or from commercial interests. Because we know that the data we need to solve our problems isn't exclusively private sector data or public sector data. And whilst we need government funding to support these initiatives and governance to get these data sharing initiatives off the ground, we need real collaboration to drive them forward and to promote interoperability so that we can connect up our data sharing initiatives as part of data sharing infrastructure. And real collaboration means closely working together, bringing different organisations to work together on common problems and allowing people from different teams to gain experience working with other teams who may have already solved that problem. It also means regularly talking to other people, including your competitors or people working on other projects separate to your project, who might be doing something similar, but in a slightly different way, and perhaps in a more efficient way. Because ultimately, this isn't about commercial advantage. It's about creating a public piece of infrastructure that allows us to share our data in a more safe and secure way. In the data sharing working group, we've hosted a number of sessions recently where we've heard from different data sharing initiatives so that we can better understand what they're doing. We've heard from NISO on the energy data sharing infrastructure, from DAFNI on the DINI project, the data infrastructure for national infrastructure, which we'll be hearing more on shortly, from Stream on the water data sharing infrastructure, and from NUA, as you will hear more later today, from Carsten and from Holger. In the group, we're able to ask questions and to find out which solutions are working best. We're not going to solve the interoperability challenge, but we will make progress in working towards it. And we have a number of sessions planned for the next few weeks on data valuation, the industrial strategy, smart data, data marketplaces, etc. So if that sounds interesting, then please get in touch and I can add you to the invite. And the recently published industrial strategy provides much hope for the future and the future of interoperability. It's very encouraging to see the ambition to become a global leader with a robust, secure, and interoperable data sharing infrastructure Those are words taken directly from the industrial strategy. And it's very encouraging to see the commitment to invest in UK data sharing infrastructure initiatives from next year to promote coordinated approaches to governance, legal considerations, regulations, data interoperability, security and trust, the very areas which the Data Sharing Working Group has highlighted as in need of greater coordination. But we also need governance in place to allow us to put standards and rules in place that will enable interoperability. And I think we need to nurture a British culture of collaboration so that we can sit round the table and include multiple parties in this to agree those standards and rules to enable interoperability. So what are the actions right now? Well, you're welcome to join the Data Sharing Working Group. Do share what you do in a reusable way. And as the Data Sharing Working Group says, do it once and share it many times. Thank you.